What I remember. I was 7 or 8 when this happened. We lived on a street that ran like a spoke from the center of town down toward the river. Our house was near the top, close to the main road. It was late afternoon. I was playing in the sand pit with a friend from next door. My mother called me in, but I stayed a bit longer. Then my friend left too. But I kept digging, the way kids do when they can't quite bring themselves to stop, until the light was going and there was nothing left to do but go home. I don't remember the walk. What I remember is turning around. I was at the bottom of the street, and when I looked back, nothing was familiar. To my right, 2 old brick garages painted dark red. To my left, a sagging house I didn't recognize. I had walked downhill and come out somewhere that wasn't my neighborhood. I ran back up. My house wasn't there either. The panic came fast. I remember crying and making sounds I'd never made before. The memory comes to me like footage of someone else, seen from a distance. A few older kids approached me and asked what was wrong. I said I was lost. They led me somewhere. After that, my memory goes dark. It picks up again with a woman carrying a small child. She'd stopped to help me. She picked me up, and I told her. My mom works at the landmark building, at the bank. I remember saying those exact words. There was a bank in a prominent building downtown, near the main plaza. That's what I meant. She carried me there. Some staff were still inside. They asked my last name. I couldn't remember it. They called the police. I have a brief image of the patrol car arriving, and then nothing. Or, not nothing. Something else. The next thing I remember is walking up to our house. It's past midnight. I open the gate, climb the 6 front steps, go inside. My mother is at the stove, back to me, cooking. My father is watching television. Neither of them reacts. They don't turn around. It's as if I'm not there. The terror of that, of being invisible inside your own home, is something I can't fully describe. I noticed specific things. Flour on the counter, 3 patties in the pan, the couch folded out, the bathroom light off. The details are still perfectly clear. They scared me so deeply that they burned themselves in. Then, nothing again. That same day, earlier, my mother had taken me to the farmer's market. We were in line at a fruit stall. An old woman passed by, stopped, looked at me, and said to my mother, "Take care of your son." No context, nothing else. My mother didn't take it seriously, but when she got home, she drilled me on our address and phone number anyway, just in case. It was supposed to be a good evening. A neighbor who owed the family a significant amount of money had promised to pay it back that night. Everyone was looking forward to it. My mother came out to check on me around dusk. I was still in the sandpit with my friend. I asked to stay a little longer. She went back inside. Half an hour later, she came back out. The sandpit was empty. She went next door. My friend was home, had been home for a while. She started calling around. Nobody had seen me. She and my father started searching the street, then the neighboring streets. All the nearby houses, including abandoned ones. She knocked on doors she normally wouldn't. No one had seen me. It was approaching midnight with no sign of me anywhere. At some point, my mother thought she saw me. She ran toward me without looking away, and I vanished. She told me years later that she understood, afterward, why people talk about grief hallucinations. She said it was completely real. A police cruiser passed by. She flagged it down. They radioed my description to the dispatch center. It turned out I was already at the station. When I was brought home, the whole street came out. Everyone had been looking. Everyone was relieved. My parents held me for a long time. I have no memory of any of this. I don't remember the police station. I don't remember my mother arriving. I don't remember any of the neighbors. What I have instead is the image of walking home alone past midnight, going inside, and my parents not seeing me. The flower, the 3 patties, the folded-out couch, the dark bathroom. My parents' version and my version of that night don't overlap at all. They describe a child who was found and brought home in a police car with a street full of people waiting. I remember none of it. What I remember instead seems impossible. The neighbor never paid back the money. The old woman's warning came true. My mother's review of the address turned out to be useless. When they asked my last name at the bank, I couldn't remember it. I'm an adult now, and I still don't know which version is real, or whether something happened that night that neither version can account for. The Far Post. I served my mandatory military rotation in the early 80s, stationed in a government facility outside the city. The building had deep subterranean levels, multiple floors underground, accessed by escalators rather than elevators, the way a subway station goes down. Entry required 2-stage verification. The deeper you went, the heavier the security. At the end of the working day, the duty shifts took over and the blast doors sealed. Those doors were rated to survive a direct nuclear strike. Once sealed, nobody entered or left without the watch officer knowing about it. My assigned post was a good one. When day shift ended, it was just me and my partner. We were positioned so that no one could approach without being seen, which meant quiet evenings. We read, drank tea, wrote letters home. That particular Friday had been ordinary. Everyone else had gone. We'd finished our checks. The tea was heating. The duty officer that night was a solid captain who didn't harass his shifts, and everyone was looking forward to a relaxed Saturday. Then, Major Harmon called up from the lower level. He needed someone to come get him. The officers down there operated differently from the regular chain of command. They cared about the work, not the formalities. You could talk to them like people, ask favors, have a real conversation. Harmon was one of the good ones. No unnecessary pressure. He was also genuinely brilliant at what he did, though I can't get into specifics. He came up looking worn out and irritated, still in his work coveralls, hands dirty. We gave him tea. He explained. There was a broken mechanism at the far post. Nothing critical, a secondary device that was rarely used, but he'd spent nearly 2 hours on it and couldn't figure out what was wrong. He'd had to leave it unfinished. He cleaned up, had some tea, and I walked him to the exit myself. My partner and I settled back in. About an hour and a half later, the watch assistant called and asked whether Major Harmon had left. I said yes, almost 2 hours ago. He made a non-committal sound and hung up. I didn't think much of it. A few minutes later, he called again and asked if I was absolutely sure. I confirmed that I'd personally walked the major to the exit. I asked what was going on. The assistant said that someone had called from the far post, identified himself as Harmon, asked for power to be restored to the far post circuit, and hung up. The post hadn't answered follow-up calls on either the primary or emergency lines. The call origin was visible on the control board. There was no question which post it came from. The far post was called that for a reason. It was over 1 kilometer away through the tunnels. Nobody went there without a reason, and there was certainly no reason for anyone to call the duty desk from there pretending to be Harmon. On top of that, the access corridor to the far post was sealed by a blast door at the end of each working day, a door that couldn't be opened without the duty officer's direct authorization. Control restored power to the far post anyway. Technically a serious protocol violation, but they probably figured there was a reasonable explanation they were missing. Half an hour later, the watch tried the far post again. No answer. They decided Harmon must have finished and left. Somehow, they didn't connect this to the sealed blast door. Then the assistant called me again, got confirmation a second time that Harmon had gone home hours ago. Control wasn't too bothered, probably figured I'd gotten confused about the timing. Since the major had supposedly left, the duty officer ordered power cut to the far post. The lights and equipment shut down, leaving only emergency circuits. Almost immediately after that, the far post called again. Same voice, same manner, asking for power restored, then hanging up and not responding to callbacks. The assistant called me a second time. I had a friend in the security office. I called the gate and asked if Harmon's access badge had been signed out. It had. His badge was logged as surrendered, which meant he was confirmed off-site. My friend also mentioned that Control had called a minute before me, asking the same question. The duty officer got on the line with me directly. He was a solid captain, not given to pranks on shift, but he asked whether this was some kind of joke. I told him I genuinely didn't know what was happening, and that I'd personally seen the major leave. He paused, then told me what had just happened. The far post had called a final time, and the voice, which sounded unmistakably like Harmon, distinctive accent and all, had asked for me specifically. The message was to bring the major's repair kit from his desk and come to the far post. It even specified where the kit was, buried under paperwork in the bottom drawer. Nobody else knew about that kit. Harmon had only brought it in the previous day, used it at the far post, and deliberately buried it under papers in his desk so it wouldn't go missing. There was no way for anyone making a prank call from the far post to know it existed, let alone where it was. The captain told me to take the kit and go. By rights, I could have refused. My orders were to stay at my post, but the captain and I had covered for each other before, and I trusted him. So I found the kit where he said it would be, grabbed a flashlight, and went. The route to the far post passed through the central control room. The captain and his assistant caught me there and asked if I'd noticed anything unusual about Harmon's behavior. I said no, just that he'd seemed more tired than usual. I still thought this was an elaborate prank. I didn't want the walk, but I went. I'd spent plenty of time alone underground and never minded it. But somewhere on the way to the far post, something changed. Not fear exactly, more like unease. A low-level wrongness that settled in my chest without announcing itself. I found myself half running in places, which was awkward with the heavy kit. The tunnel to the far post ended at a vertical shaft about 20 meters deep, a former elevator shaft, the lift removed years ago and replaced with a fixed ladder and a small hoist for equipment. I climbed up. At the top, I noticed the safety gate around the shaft was standing open. That should only happen if someone was actively using the hoist. No sign of Harmon. The tunnel continued another 50 meters past the shaft before bending sharply right. I assumed he was around the corner. The unease sharpened. I called his name. Nothing. I checked the equipment room where the broken mechanism was. Empty. Lights on. The panel open with work half done. I turned the lights off and went to the phone at the far end of the corridor. Nobody there either. That was when I was genuinely scared. I couldn't tell you exactly why. I turned on my flashlight, even though the corridor lighting was fine. I remembered the open safety gate and went back to check the shaft, thinking maybe he'd fallen. I leaned over and shone the light down. Empty. I called his name several times as loud as I could. The lights hummed. My own pulse was loud in my ears. I went to the telephone and called the duty desk, told them the far post was empty. The captain went quiet for a while, then asked where Harmon had gone. I said I had no idea. I was heading back toward the ladder when I heard the safety gate creak open behind me. Unmistakable sound, the specific metallic scrape and rattle of that particular gate. I relaxed immediately. The Major had shown up after all. I came around the bend and saw him. He was standing at the edge of the open shaft, back to me. The gate was open behind him, just as I'd heard. I called out. He turned. He was in his work coveralls. I had a brief thought about when he'd had time to change back into them. I could clearly see his face, and I saw him smile when he recognized me. Nothing unusual about him at all. I slowed my pace, relieved. Then he raised both arms slowly above his head, like a man surrendering. He kept smiling, kept his eyes on me, and slowly fell backward into the shaft. I ran. I was maybe 30 meters away. I didn't reach him in time. I heard him falling, heard the shaft's metal framing ringing as he grazed it on the way down, and then the impact. Something locked up in my body. I couldn't move for what felt like a full minute. Then I ran down the ladder, got the lower shaft doors open, and looked inside. Nobody. I shone the light up the shaft. Nothing clinging to the framework. Nothing on the floor. I shouted until my voice broke. Silence. Just the hum of the lights and my own blood in my ears. The fear that hit me then was different from anything before it. Not a thought fear, a body fear, deep in the spine. The only thought was, get out. I have never run like that in my life. I didn't stop until I reached the lit section of the main corridor where there were other people. I made it to the duty desk, barely able to speak. The captain and assistant stared at me. The captain asked, not unkindly, what had happened. I managed to say Harmon's name. The assistant said, almost gently, that everything was fine with Harmon. After my first call from the far post, they'd reached him at home on his personal line. He'd been there all evening. He confirmed he'd worked the far post that afternoon, left the mechanism unfinished, and planned to go back tomorrow. I sat down. The captain gave me tea. While they stepped into the back room to talk, I noticed a call light blinking on the duty board. I looked at the source. Far post. I called the captain back. The assistant put it on speaker. Static came through, not the usual clean connection of those internal lines, but a soft hiss with high-pitched whistling underneath. The assistant asked repeatedly for identification. Then, through the noise, clearly, "Don't run the triangle." The voice was Harmon's. Then the line went dead. The captain tried the far post on the emergency line. No answer. He started making calls, voice rising, threatening consequences for whoever was responsible. Then he told me I was off shift. I'd done nothing wrong, but I was in no condition to work, and he'd cover it as special duty assignment. He asked me to say nothing. I slept as soon as I hit my bunk. Before noon the next day, the word came through. Major Harmon was dead. He had fallen down the elevator shaft at the far post. What I learned later from the duty assistant who told me privately, that morning the captain had called Harmon at home and carefully described the previous night's events. Harmon had laughed. He thought it was a put-on. They'd argued. The captain had insisted Harmon not go to the far post alone, that any work be formally logged. Harmon, amused but humoring him, had sent a corporal ahead to wait there and stopped by the duty desk himself on his way down. By the end of that conversation, the major had stopped laughing. Two things had gotten to him. First, the repair kit. His personal tools, brought in the previous day, used at the far post, and deliberately buried in his desk so no one would take them. No one could have known they were there, certainly not whoever had been calling from the far post. Second, the phrase, "Don't run the triangle." The fault with the mechanism at the far post only manifested when the motor windings were switched to the delta configuration. Harmon had told no one this. Not the corporals, not the duty officer, not me. He went to the far post. His corporal arrived first, waited a few minutes, then stepped around a corner to smoke where Harmon wouldn't smell it. When he came back, Harmon was standing at the edge of the open shaft, back to him. The corporal didn't want to startle him. Then he heard something, thought someone called the major's name from behind him, turned and saw no one. When he looked back, Harmon was facing him, looking past him at something, smiling. He raised both arms slowly above his head and fell. The corporal called the duty desk immediately and stayed on the line until the rescue team arrived. They found the major at the bottom of the shaft. He was alive when he hit the ground. He was not alive for long after. The investigation was brief. No signs of foul play, no toxicology findings, no identified motive for self-harm. Ruled an accident. The corporal was listed as a witness, but was quietly separated from his post. I never found out what became of him. The captain and the assistant both left within the year. I finished my rotation, came home, got married, had a son. Normal life. Years later, I tried to call an old army friend in another city. The line had that same sound, the same soft static and whistling I'd heard on the duty board that night. Not crackling, not the usual long-distance interference. That specific sound. Something tightened in my chest before I'd even consciously placed it. I hung up, called back. Same sound. Called other numbers, all normal. His line, that sound. I reached him eventually. He sounded fine, said everything was good, mentioned he was going to his nephew's wedding the next day. Something made me try to talk him out of it. He thought I'd lost my mind. He was stabbed at the reception. Died the following day. I mostly use text messages now.
Debts. Have you ever owed someone something? I used to be in debt to everyone, and I genuinely didn't care. My operating principle was, take everything, give back nothing. Or at minimum, I forgive everyone I owe. It started young. Childhood trades where I'd take the other kid's toy and disappear. Those things probably still sit in someone's basement. Then came lunch money in school, cigarettes in high school, favors that were never returned. I wasn't above bigger things either. I made promises to women, serious ones, that I had no intention of keeping. More than once, I'd strung someone along for the better part of a year, swearing I'd marry them while seeing other people on the side. I also managed to walk away from a loan once without repayment. Clean exit. I wasn't proud of it exactly, but I liked how it felt. Invincible. There was always some fear lurking at the edges, a creditor turning ugly, someone I'd wronged deciding to settle it. But it was small enough that I barely noticed it most of the time. I don't know exactly where this story starts. I had plenty of people with reasons to want payback, but I think the real beginning was something else. Last summer, I took a road trip with my one close friend. We had money and a reason to be somewhere else while things calmed down at home. We went by train, then hitchhiked, walked stretches when we had to. Eventually ended up in a small city in the mountain states. We booked a room at a local motel and walked around to see what there was to see. Not much. A park, a civic center that was clearly trying to look important, a small lake at the edge of town, fields and pine forest in every direction. Then we saw a hand-painted sign on a piece of plywood. Fortune-telling, readings available. No flourishes, no crystal balls implied, just plain letters on raw wood. We had nothing better to do. We found the address, not a storefront or a decorated parlor, just a regular apartment. The woman who answered the door was in her 50s, face deeply lined, a mass of salt and pepper hair. She could have been from any number of backgrounds. We told her we'd seen the sign. She nodded and let us in, took us to the kitchen. She read my friend first and asked me to wait in the other room. When we switched, she was washing out a small ceramic coffee cup. I assumed I was about to get the standard treatment: grounds, platitudes, vague warnings. Instead, she came at me like she'd been waiting. Her hands stopped about 8 inches from my forehead, and her fingers started moving. The kind of elaborate gesturing that charlatans do in newspaper ads, except her face went somewhere else entirely. It twisted into an expression I'd never seen on a human face before. She made a sound somewhere between hissing and a low moan. Her eyes rolled back. I'm not someone who scares easily. I pressed myself into the back of that chair anyway. Then it stopped. She dropped into the seat next to me, pulled out a cheap cigarette, and filled the kitchen with smoke. 3 people are coming for you, she said. All 3 want something from you. The first is a woman. Red hair. She wants your hand and your heart. Or, more specifically, she wants a part of you separated from the rest. I went through my mental list of women I'd wronged. No redheads that I could remember. My skepticism reasserted itself. The second is a man. He wants your blood. He wants you dead. Who have you crossed? She said this with a slight smile that I didn't like. Nobody specific, I said. And the third? The third is the most dangerous. She reached for an egg, a needle, a jar of water, and a small saucer. She worked with them in silence for a moment. I won't describe the details, and then produced 3 small knotted cords, which she'd tied in front of me. Burn 1 knot per month. Your problems will dissolve one by one. And when they're gone, come back to me. I have a little more to finish. You'll pay me then. I knew perfectly well I had no intention of going back to a small city I'd already mentally left. My friend paid for his reading. She took nothing from me, just said I'd pay in 4 months. I dropped the knots in my jacket pocket and forgot about them. We finished the trip, came home, life resumed. 6 months or so later, I found the knots while looking through my jacket on the balcony one evening. One of them had almost completely unraveled. It had degraded into nothing recognizable. I smiled at the memory and, half as a joke, burned one of the remaining knots on the spot, let the ash drop off the balcony railing. About 2 weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that a woman named Galena had disappeared. She'd been on a group tour somewhere, and at some point, she simply wasn't there anymore. The guide hadn't seen her go. The other tourists hadn't seen anything. Search teams went through the full route. Nothing.
She turned up 2 weeks after that, in a rural area well outside the tour's path. The cause of death was listed as asphyxiation. No signs of assault. No medical history of respiratory conditions. Drag marks on her legs, suggesting she'd been moved after death. No explanation for how she'd gotten where she was found. 2 things connected this to me. First, Galena had been one of the women I'd led along. Almost a year of promises I knew I'd never keep. Then a clean disappearance from her life. Second, her phone had been recovered with a dead battery. When investigators charged it, her recent calls showed she'd been trying to reach a specific number in her last minutes. My old number. It hadn't been active in years. They brought me in twice for questioning. During one of the interviews, I caught a glimpse of crime scene photographs. Her hair, in the most recent pictures, was red. It came back to me then. The woman with red hair wants something of yours. Further investigation of her apartment turned up a collection of my photographs, some with the eyes scratched out, some cut into pieces, and a couple of crude effigies with my face drawn on them, bristling with pins between the legs. She'd been carrying a fixation on me for years after I left without a word.
Maybe coincidence. But the smell of that whole thing was wrong, and the detail about the red hair wouldn't leave me alone. If the fortune teller had been right about one, the second was still out there. I didn't wait. I burned the second knot that same evening on the balcony. 3 days later, word came that a man I owed money to, a rough type from the neighborhood, someone I'd burned on a car deal years back, had died. His friends invited me to drink to his memory. They said he'd had a bad sore throat for days, and that night he'd simply stopped breathing. Fast, with foam. I'd never heard of a sore throat killing anyone like that, but I didn't pursue it. If I'm honest, I wasn't sorry. He was not a good person, and I felt something I probably shouldn't have. Curiosity. 2 knots, 2 deaths. The last knot was in my hand. I burned it. I'm sorry I did. By then, the cord had almost come apart on its own. It was frayed on 3 sides, barely holding together. It burned unevenly, more smoke than the others, with a faint crackling. Nothing happened immediately. No news of a ruined bank or a dissolved debt. Weeks passed. About 6 weeks later, at 3 in the morning, my landline rang. Long, continuous tone, a long-distance call. I went to the hallway and picked up. No one spoke. But it wasn't the silence of someone holding a phone and saying nothing. It was the silence of a dead line. No background noise, no hiss, no hum. Just absence. I hung up. 15 minutes later, it rang again. Same thing. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror while I held the receiver. My reflection wasn't moving when I was moving. I told myself it was dark and I'd been startled awake. I put the phone down. The line rang twice more that night. I stopped answering and eventually pulled the cord from the wall. Then I tried to sleep. Almost under, I heard a sound. Not something inside the apartment. Not pipes. Not a neighbor. It was the specific sound of a fingernail dragged slowly across glass. Long and slow. Starting and stopping, as if whoever was doing it had all the time in the world. I looked at the window. Nothing there. Nightlight from the street. Curtains moving slightly. I decided it was building noise and fell asleep. In the morning, everything looked normal, except the hallway mirror seemed darker than it should have been. Slightly clouded, as if something had passed over it from inside. 2 nights of quiet. Then it started again. The glass sound, the phone calls, and now footsteps. Slow, hollow footsteps on the stairs outside my apartment. I was certain of them. I heard them clearly, more than once, on different nights. One morning I found a sewing needle in my front door. Ordinary needle, pushed in at eye level, with something dark and rust-colored on the tip. I understood, then, that I hadn't paid the fortune teller. That was the open debt she'd mentioned. I thought about going back, but I couldn't remember the name of the town. Couldn't find it on any map I looked at. I called my friend. He was in a hospital psych ward following a minor car accident. Physically uninjured, but apparently something had broken loose in him. When I asked what city we'd been in, he said, in a voice I didn't recognize, "You." Then he started crying in a way that didn't sound like crying. The next night I sat up with a Bible I'd bought at a church shop that afternoon and a bottle of holy water. I'm not a religious person. I knew even then it probably wouldn't matter. I lasted until around 3. The footsteps came back on the stairs. I got up, took the flashlight, and went to the front door. Looked through the peephole. Empty hallway. I was reaching for the handle when the door shook. 3, 4, 5 hard impacts, as if someone outside was kicking it as hard as they could. I stumbled back. The noise stopped. Total silence. And then the glass sound started again, very close, to my right. I didn't want to turn and look. Something in me made me turn anyway. My reflection in the hallway mirror was standing facing me. I was standing sideways. It was facing me directly. Its hands were on the inside of the glass, moving slowly up and down against the surface, feeling for something. Its eyes, what should have been my eyes, were running. Long, dark streaks moving down the glass from where the eyes should have been. The mirror was cracking slightly at the center, as if pressure were building from behind it. I don't know how long it lasted. At some point, I threw the remaining holy water at the glass. No explosion. No scream. A high-pitched ringing in my ears, a rush of pressure like the altitude change on a plane. My reflection blurred. The figure raised its arms slowly, arms up, like a man surrendering, and threw its full weight against the glass from the inside. A crack and a collapse of sound. I'm writing this from a hospital, the psychiatric ward. Nobody believes me. The doctors have a clean explanation involving dissociation and stress response. But I've been thinking about what the fortune teller said. The third one, the most dangerous, was me. I had been coming for myself the whole time, collecting on what I'd refused to acknowledge I owed. The debts I burned off the other two weren't paid. They were transferred. And the figure in the mirror, the one that looked exactly like me until it didn't, had been settling those accounts one by one before turning to the last name on the list. My name. The principle is simple, in the end. Everything given to you was given by someone. Every gift has a source. And the debt doesn't disappear because you've decided not to pay it. It waits. And whatever eventually comes to collect it will look familiar. Will look, in fact, exactly like you. Right up until the moment you understand that it isn't. I'm missing my right eye. The doctors have their explanation for that too.